Good morning, it's October 15th. This is To My Liberal Friends. And if you like the podcast, hit the subscribe button on the YouTube channel. Well, for the past few decades, we've heard Republicans complain about media coverage and how the liberal media props up Democrats while attacking Republicans and conservatives in general. Democrats like to pretend it's not true, but I suspect even they realize what's going on within their party and the media. We see it in debates where the moderators, even when they're not supposed to do so by the rules, continually fact-check Republicans while ignoring blatantly false statements by their Democratic opponents. In 2020, the media allowed Joe Biden to hunker down in his basement in Delaware and defended that strategy because of COVID. Now here we are 4 years later and the pandemic is over, but Kamala Harris has been able to avoid talking to the press and simply make canned speeches using a teleprompter. But when you become complicit in aiding one side of a campaign, things can go awry. And suddenly what you, the media, have been doing is out in the public for the voters to see. A classic example of this is a 60 Minutes interview that Harris did and apparently was allowed to give different answers to the questions, and CBS show would only use the one that was more coherent and helped their campaign. Now, before we get into that mess, I want to be upfront. The media hates Donald Trump, and they view him as a threat to Western civilization. In the back of their minds, they feel guilty about giving him so much coverage in 2016 that he actually defeated Hillary Clinton. But allow me to give you an example of how that campaign went. In March of 2016, I was attending a fundraiser for John Larson, a Democrat on the Ways and Means Committee from Connecticut. He was helpful to a client, so I was obligated to attend the dinner. Late in the evening, Congressman Larson came up to me and asked me what I thought about Trump. At the time, I did not think much of his chances, so I told him he was in the race for publicity for his TV show, and he probably wouldn't go anywhere. Larson smiled and said he was not so sure. He said that Augie and Boris in the diner liked him. He was metaphorically speaking about union members in his district. And I just said, well, we'll see. Later, I ran into Congressman Larson outside of a tax hearing after Trump became the nominee, and he said, quote, "I told you not to dismiss Trump, but now Hillary will kick his ass," end quote. I told him I would not be so sure of that because Trump was gathering a strong following, particularly among working class voters. Fast forward to January and I'm in Larson's office with a client. He pulled me aside and said, quote, "I guess we were both wrong about Trump." Moving back to CBS and 60 Minutes, the long-running news show has come under fire after allegedly cleaning up the Democratic presidential candidate's answer to a question from 60 Minutes correspondent Bill Whitaker about Israel that aired during a special episode on Monday. Her reply was starkly different from the word salad the vice president served up in a clip to promote the interview shown by Face the Nation the day before. The former CBS News journalist, when asked about the discrepancy, said, quote, "I think there should be an outside investigation. Obviously, there's a problem here. If they care about journalistic integrity, they would conduct the investigation and release the full transcript," end quote. Now, that's a damning accusation. Normally, CBS releases the full transcript, but in this instance, they've declined despite multiple requests from others in the press. And I think there's ample evidence that the news organizations of the major sources of this nation are more liberal than the overall public. All Sides, a neutral observer of media news, rates just about every news group out there. To give you some perspective, they place sources like Newsweek, Forbes, Reuters, Christian Science Monitor, and the Wall Street Journal in the center. On the right, they have the New York Post, Fox News, Washington Times, and some others that are less well known. But on the left, meaning more liberal, they have ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, NPR, Time Magazine, Politico, New York Times, MSNBC, The Atlantic, Yahoo News, USA Today, Washington Post, Axios, and Bloomberg. That's a whole lot of news out there that's decidedly liberal. And that list shows the major news sources in this country are that liberal, and it's reflected in how they cover the news and the candidates they endorse. A classic example is what happened when CBS Morning co-host Tony Dokoupil grilled author Ta-Nehisi Coates about his book that's highly critical of Israel. He asked the author why he left out so much of the backstory of aggression against Israel by its neighbors, particularly Hamas and Hezbollah. Dokoupil and Coates had a spirited conversation, but it remained civil on the air. But inside the CBS News department, there was outrage and revolt, and that he would confront Coates, and Dokoupil was forced to meet with a CBS in-house race and culture unit after multiple complaints by other employees. Similarly, NBC hired Ronna McDaniel, former chair of the Republican National Committee, only to have to fire her within a week because of employees complaining. This would include Rachel Maddow, Chuck Todd, Nicole Wallace, Joy Reid, and Jen Psaki. The only conservatives they want hired are those that would denounce Donald Trump and other Republicans. Liz Cheney would be their type of Republican. The people working in the media are more liberal than the overall society, and they live in their own bubble where they seem to think they are the arbiters of what should be reported in the news and what should not. This election year might bring them a rude awakening that they're misinformed. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening. And if you enjoy the podcast, again, hit the subscribe button.